Welcome to Sundays with Jane Eyre. This is episode 27, the penultimate episode. Ferndean, covering volume 3, chapter 11 or chapter 37 of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach at the Rosenbach in Philadelphia today. And joining me as co-host is Dr. Sophie Franklin. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, great to be here again. This is my second time on Sundays with Jane Eyre.
It is. I love having you. And you're joining us from Germany today, right?
I am, yes.
All
Quite
right.
snowy here, actually.
Snowy. Wow. I wish. Oh, boy. I love that.
It's April.
That's my weather, though. Yeah. I'll take that
Really?
every day of the week. Oh, yeah. Especially
Amazing.
a late snowstorm. I really like that. So we're going to have some rain here at some point today. So,
Okay.
but that's okay because we're all indoors and enjoying ourselves watching the show. Welcome to all our erudite Brontosaurs and airheads. If you're new to the show, just a note on our format, if you're watching live on Zoom, the chat is for you to talk to each other during the show and have fun doing that. But if you have a question for us, put it in the Q&A box on Zoom, and we'll do our best to hit as many of them as possible today. We're also streaming live on YouTube. And I encourage everyone to like and subscribe to the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. If you leave a comment there during the show, then I'll answer it after the show. So, or a question there. And let's skip because it's been since December. I'll give you, since you were on, I'll give you another intro. Dr. Sophie Franklin is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Tübingen, specializing in the Brontes' violence, 19th century literature and culture, and afterlives. She completed her PhD at Durham University in 2019, where she explored representations of violence in Anne, Charlotte, and Emily Bronte's work, and is the author of Charlotte Bronte Revisited, A View from the 21st Century, published by Saraband. And is there a paperback, or is that coming out in America now soon?
Yes, yeah, it is in paperback in the UK already, but all three of the books, Claire's book, Adele's book as well, they're coming out in the US spring, summer. So yeah, watch this space.
Good. And you will be leading our Bronte course, which will begin on Sundays, a couple weeks after the show ends. And the course is called The Brontes Revisited, Reappraised, Reimagined, a take on the three books that Clara Callahan wrote on Emily Bronte, that you wrote on Charlotte Bronte, and Adele Hay wrote on Anne Bronte. And each of you biographers will lead one session. Claire's going to kick us off with Wuthering Heights, and then you will do Villette.
Yeah.
And then Adele Hay will do Tenant of Wildfeld Hall, and then there'll be a fourth with all of you on, which will be the most
exactly.
Talking about all the Brontes. People can register for that course at the Rosenbach's website. It is filling up, and I look forward to sitting back in that class, just doing it myself without
the pressure will be off you.
without having to do all the talking. Yeah. I like that a lot. So, well, I have a good cocktail today. I decided to do cocktails for the last three shows. And last week we did a cocktail, very nice gin cocktail, and then I asked everybody to name it. So I'm going to do that again this week. The one last week I ended up with the name Jane Triumphant, which I thought was so good because a couple of chapters, like I think her overcoming St. John's, like just
grass,
and then racing off to for her to do what she really, to follow her heart, was really great. And this week I thought I'd kind of put a little Rochester in the drink. So there's whiskey. It's whiskey, Amaro, pear brandy, and simple syrup. And so if you're watching the show live on Zoom, and if you have a name for it, put it in the chat. And just the chat's fine, because I don't. I'll look at all the names after the show, and then choose a name that reflects the chapter we're talking about today. That with Jane going to Ferndean and reuniting with Rochester. That's what I'm looking for. So not after any other characters that aren't here and that kind of thing. And then I will choose one of the names and post it on our Facebook group. And it's a very tasty drink.
It looks good. And has it got pear in it, like an actual
It is.
pear?
There's a little pear slice in there.
Wow.
It's just a canned pear slice. And actually, it's interesting. Instead of simple syrup, I actually use the pear juice from the can of.
Amazing. Oh, it sounds really good.
So I love canned fruit too. So my wife always gets on me about that. She might be watching the show today. If she is. She's always, canned fruit. It's delicious. So.
Oh.
But this is a good drink. I have to be careful this week. I can't drink because I'm at the Rosenbach and I have to make it home. So
that's true. Just stay overnight there. I don't know.
I will put the drink recipe in the chat here for people to see. And there it is. So give me your best name for it. And the last time you were here, Sophie, that was for volume 2, chapter 3 or chapter 18 on episode 13. And that was when Blanche and friends were visiting Thornfield and they had the game of charades, which was so revealing about the characters. So since it's been so long, just in general, I want your take on a couple things. I want your take on just Jane's relationship with Rochester, and really since it developed from that point and where he was kind of planning to put them together and achieve that, but of course he was being deceitful because he wasn't talking about, his mad wife in the attic. So that, Bertha, and then I want you to take on St. John too before we get the chapter today. But start with Jane and Rochester as a relationship, because sometimes it's hard for I think many people and now to accept that it's a positive relationship, and yet I think it's a very mixed relationship in the novel.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with you that I think in some ways, when I first read this novel, I was much younger, and so I did read their relationship in a more straightforward, romantic, harmonious way. And now rereading it again and again and again, I do struggle with aspects of it. I mean, even we'll talk about this, she still is calling him master, my master.
Sure.
I think she gains a lot of pleasure from that. It's kind of eroticized in a way. But I think my heart will always be, happy that they are reunited. I think again, we'll talk about this. They are meant to be in this kind of very classic romantic sense. I do think that the fact that she becomes financially independent is key to this. I mean, of course, there are also these problems around how she becomes financially independent because the money comes from her uncle from Madeira, which was, implicated in the British Empire. And so she benefits from that directly. But the independence of Jane Eyre is very important, the financial independence. And so I do think that puts them on a more equal footing. Yeah, I think also the way that they have this kind of very intense banter, and we see that in this chapter that we'll discuss soon. I really like how playful they are together as well. And then, you mentioned my research is all about violence, specifically in relation to the Brontes. And I am fascinated with how their relationship really incorporates, and I mean, violence isn't embedded necessarily, but it is a major part of their dynamic in a sense. So on the one hand, you have Jane trying to keep him at bay when they're kind of in the courting stage, they're engaged, and she uses kind of small acts of violence like pinching him, kind of slapping him away, and then her words are kind of cutting. And then you also have that chapter where they have that confrontation after the discovery of Bertha. And
he really threatens her.
Exactly. He says, I'll try violence. And the whole scene, it's really quite graphic, actually. I think, I mean, even, Stevie Davies in the 2006 Penguin edition, she actually says quite bluntly that he threatens her with rape. And so I think that, again, really changes my perspective on their dynamic, Rochester as a character, and then Jane's response to that is also very strange.
It is, because she says, I can control him and I know what to do, which spoken exactly like someone in an abusive relationship.
Yes.
So, always trying to manage the person's
exactly. Exactly. And then she says, "Oh, I cried," and then that kind of subdued him. And you think that's just it's such a kind of manipulative and yes, abusive dynamic, really. So I'm very conflicted about their relationship. I'm pulled in two directions, I think. This kind of romantic, idealized vision, and then, this very abusive, violent one. And St. John.
Before Bertha? But now we're talking about violence.
Okay.
So, there you go. I mean, Rochester's treatment of Bertha is, within the novel, is, I think Bronte does her best to justify his locking Bertha in a room in a windowless room for 10 years.
Yeah.
Even though later in a letter she writes in a letter, we talked about this during that chapter, that she actually writes in a letter, you're aware, is that she thought that she went too far and she should have been more sympathetic towards Bertha as an author.
Exactly.
But there it is. I mean, Rochester even
further abuse. Exactly. I mean, and also actually, especially reading this chapter, you think, well, you have this house, Ferndean, which is desolate and dilapidated and stuff. Why couldn't you house Bertha? I mean, I guess the question is, why can't you just set Bertha free? But in another circumstance, why can't you have Bertha at Ferndean rather than in this imprisoned tiny room? Even more inhumane. It just doesn't really make any sense, other than he is just a violent.
Well, his excuse for Ferndean is it's too damp; it would kill her, and that doesn't. I don't buy that at all.
Why are you there then? Yeah, exactly. And his father seemed to be fine there. Yeah, Yes, Bertha, and then of course you have this kind of, a lot of critics read her as this dark double of Jane. I don't really like doing that, because I think it removes the humanity from Bertha, the fact that she is a character in her own right. She doesn't obviously speak at all in the novel, but she is a human being in the story world. And I just think it does not reflect well on Rochester, exactly, his treatment of her.
And it is good that Jane. Jane calls him out on it. I mean, she does. She does. That's the first thing she calls him out on, is the treatment of Bertha, and couldn't he have been more compassionate? And I think by that point he is so defensive against everybody judging him that it's pretty. I think it's easy to read it as a novel as he doesn't come up with a good reason for why he wasn't more compassionate. So
no, I don't think he does. I mean, I think he makes it about himself and how difficult Bertha was as a person, and how he was hard done by his father and brother. And I mean, yes, Jane does defend Bertha in a way, or at least try to stick up for, or not even stick up for her, but kind of just point out, well, actually what you've done is pretty cruel. And she's still a person who you claim to previously love, I guess. But I still think the fact that she does return to him, and Bertha has to die in order for Jane to be triumphant, right? As you mentioned.
I just recently, I'm rewatching all the adaptations, and I just recently rewatched the 2006 BBC with
Ruth Wilson.
Ruth Wilson and Toby Stephens, and then I also watched the Fukunaga film from 2011 with Michael Fassbender and Mia Wasikowska, something like that. Wasikowska.
Maybe it's
both of those productions really just make Rochester seem like, he just he did what he could. And they really excuse his treatment of Bertha in both of those. And Jane doesn't even bother to question him because he did the best he could. And I don't find that in the novel.
No, exactly. I mean, I think there's so much to be said for adaptations, especially these kind of film and TV adaptations of Jane Eyre, and how they don't really account for a lot of the Gothicism, the supernaturalism, and the violence and the kind of cruelty.
Yeah.
Not only just in Rochester, but in Jane and Rochester's dynamic as a relationship, as a couple. I think with the Fukunaga one, the director Fukunaga did say that he was going to try and kind of do justice to that element of the novel, and then actually on the final cut, it was just romance and.
Yep, that's all they went for. Yeah. And a very intense romance too. Like there's no fun. There's no fun in that movie.
No, very, yes, intense is the word, I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're about to, in joining Rochester and Ferndean in the actually 2 chapters ago, Jane almost succumbs to St. John. And then she hears that voice somewhere, and it's, she hears Rochester, and we'll have more of that later today to talk about. But I can't imagine you're on Team St. John, because no one seems to be on Team St. John anymore. But give me your take on St. John, especially because, and we'll see it in the last chapter next week, Bronte goes out of her way to have us not dislike St. John, and to take him as an admirable character. But within the context of this novel, I don't find him to be at all like really a competitor for, in as it is a romance or as it is a marriage novel. But Jane's but his treatment of Jane is certainly, well, anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah. Give me your take on St. John.
Yes, I mean, I'm not a big fan of St. John. Again, I will be really interested to hear what you discuss next week about the ending, because I still find the ending of this novel, not to give any spoilers, but the last paragraph,
it ends with St. John.
It's so strange. And well, maybe it's not strange. I actually do think this chapter gives some insight, and we'll maybe talk about that, into maybe why Bronte ends in the way she does. But yeah, I think St. John is a competitor to an extent with Rochester, because he represents the spiritual, the kind of otherworldly, and then Rochester is this kind of very embodied, fleshly, material person. And I think it is these two options for Jane. Does she follow, her heart, but also, what she desires, what she wants on earth, or does she go with St. John and kind of sacrifice her life, basically? And I think that for Charlotte Bronte, those options are probably quite appealing in a way. This kind of very intellectual, stripped of emotion mentality, I think, is, again, there's a passion in this kind of lack of passion, right? This kind of extremity of non-emotion. I think that's really interesting in itself. But yes, I'm very happy that Jane did not end up going to India with St. John and becoming his wife, because for no reason at all.
She recognizes and rejects him, that he's not going, and his idea of love. But here's the question. If she doesn't hear the voice.
You're right.
Do you think she settles and says, okay, you don't love me, but I'll marry you and go off and be a missionary? Because she feels like she's close to that. She feels all that pressure from him. And he's like this radiant, being, trying to get her there.
Yeah, it's not like he's repulsive. She's actually quite attracted to him, not in the same way as, not necessarily in a sexual way, in the way that she is with Rochester, but there is a sense of she's drawn to him. And exactly, there is that moment in that previous chapter where she just feels like, I just want to rush headlong, down this river with him, and I would just completely let him consume every part of me. Yeah. Which again, obviously with Rochester, she doesn't necessarily know that, but obviously, as we will discuss in this chapter, he will allow her, or does allow her. He accepts that she is her own individual, that she is an independent person. Whereas with St. John, there is this recognition that he would not really accept that. He would not allow her to be her own person. But I think maybe she would have done it, because I think there's also there's a part of Jane that is kind of the martyr, right? And she likes to, sacrifice herself, but put herself in these situations where she has to deny parts of herself, repress parts of herself.
It would harken back to that Helen Burns lesson, the doctrine of endurance. And Helen feels that she is a kind of martyr, and dies after the abuse that she suffers. And it is a good thing to endure it, and then die and go on. And this is St. John's play too, of course, as well. I often find him he's really struck me on this reading as the kind of, as Bronte almost needs him as a character to help the reader get back to Rochester, because after Rochester's betrayal of Jane and that he hid, and he was going to really, he was going to destroy her life by marrying her with a wife already. And it's eventually going to be found out. It's going to be scandal. Jane's going to be, ruined by that. And that's such a bad thing but Jane still completely loves him. Regardless of that, they're still like soulmates, right? Like they talk of that kind of language. So for the reader Jane already accepts him. The reader needs to accept them. And I think St. John provides that impetus as we're watching him. And we think that well, Rochester's not so bad. Like Rochester at least loves you, he's devoted to you. He's willing to make you his equal in a relationship. At least he says he is. And so I think St. John kind of really serves that purpose in the novel too, to bring us back to Rochester. Jane doesn't need it. I think the reader needs it.
True. Yes, because I think it is quite a shock obviously we now know what the big reveal is, but I think when you first read that book and have no idea, it's monumental.
Jane's rich now.
Yes.
You don't need
She's
Rochester.
rich.
You can have a quite productive life. You don't need to, join somebody just because. But she is in love with him, and he is completely in love with her too. And that's for next week. Oh no, that's this week. No, we're definitely gonna hit that later. Because this is really the end of the novel. The last chapter is just like a wrap up.
Yeah, it's a few pages, really. Exactly.
And it's wrap up. It's like this happened to this character, and we get really the end of everything in this chapter today.
Yeah.
Well, we will. And also think, do you think Rochester is redeemed in the account of the fire?
I mean, it depends on the account of the fire. It depends on whether you think that when he goes up there and speaks to Bertha, what does he say? I guess there is this element of doubt. If you feel quite suspicious, does he say something to her? Well, I mean, but the man at the pub, he kind of says, he witnessed it, but he said he kind of approached her, and then she says something or screams and then jumps. So you think, are you this hero? I mean,
maybe he said jump.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he said something. I mean, again, we'll never know. It's not in the novel. It's just pure speculation.
There you go.
Is he redeemed? I mean, again, we'll get onto this, won't we? The fact that he is now blind and has, one hand is gone. It's been amputated. So I guess in that sense, he's sacrificed, so-called, something.
All right.
For that, for saving his servants. Although again, and we'll get onto this in this chapter, he refers to them as hirelings. And you think, okay, okay, this is what you really think. All
righty. Well, that's good. Then we'll definitely get to talk about that a little later. Just a quick question before we start. Quinley asks, he says, I was reading Jane Eyre and wondering why Rochester was calling Jane Janet. I don't believe he called her this, but he actually has called her Janet in the novel, and it's just a nickname for Jane in the 19th century. So it's just it's like Janie, like as you would maybe hear more today, but Janet is just a nickname for Jane. And that's actually true. If that's where Janet comes from, it's as a nickname for Jane. But
good question. I mean, why would we know that? Yeah.
But let's get into this chapter, volume 3, chapter 11, or chapter 37. Yes. Jane is off to Ferndean at the end of the last chapter. As soon as she hears from the old butler at the inn that this is where he is, and she says, let's go instantly. And if you can drive me to Ferndean this day, I'll pay you twice. I'll double the fee. So The manor house of Ferndean was a building of considerable antiquity, moderate size, and no architectural pretensions, deep buried in a wood. And we'll get a little more description of Ferndean. And again, as we mentioned, this is the house that Rochester wouldn't use.
Yeah.
So damp that she might die there. But it is gloomy. And Jane notices this right off the bat. It's dark, and the woods are so thick and dark that there's iron gates that you lead in at one point, and then even there you don't even see the house for a while. The darkness of natural as well as of sylvan dusk gathered about me. Dank and green where it's decaying walls, no flowers, no garden beds. This is a kind of a desolate spot, and it's the last of the locations in this novel that we'll have and we'll finish with. And I don't know, I find that a little interesting. We start with Gateshead, and then we're at Lowood, Thornfield. We get back to Gateshead briefly, and then Thornfield, and now then Morehouse.
Yeah.
Now here, and Bronte really takes her time to describe all of her settings and the houses that characters are in. And this one it's the gloomy Gothic house that Rochester's gone to be a recluse in. Yeah. She sees him come out the door, and her question is, can there be life here? Which I find to be an interesting question. Like, this doesn't even look like a house where, there could be life, where people could live. And maybe this whole description here is kind of justifying Rochester not sending Bertha there.
True.
But I don't know, Ferndean or windowless attic for 10 years.
Yeah.
I'd take Ferndean.
I would say, and also I think it serves the purpose Rochester's purpose anyway. Not that we're condoning Bertha being locked up anywhere, but it serves his purpose of removing her from the eyes of society. And I think that's another interesting aspect, that the fact that this is where they both end up, Jane and Rochester, very removed from, society, community, other people, and maybe even judgment surrounding that. So, yeah.
Well, she sees Rochester come out. A figure came out into the twilight and stood on the step. A man without a hat stretched forth his hand as if to feel whether it rained. And I recognized him. It was my master, Edward Fairfax Rochester, and no other. But she doesn't call out or anything. I stayed my step, almost my breath, and stood to watch him, to examine him myself unseen, and alas, to him invisible, which will give him opportunity to call her a fairy again later. But there is that kind of, when they're together, there is that, for as much as, I find Rochester kind of diminishing Jane by calling her some magical creature, that it always seems to happen with the two of them.
Definitely. And I mean, it happens with him too, because of course, when they first met, he obviously referred to her as, you're of the fairy people, but then she also saw Pilot and thought immediately of the guy trash and the horse. And so there's also something otherworldly, partly about him, perhaps, maybe in a more sinister sense, with the guy trash, but
I like her too, watching him unseen.
Yes.
As he did for so long with her, without her realizing that he was doing that with her.
Yeah, because actually the last chapter we discussed, with the charades and everything, she was watching him the whole time, and it was obvious, even though he wasn't kind of making it clear that he knew, obviously he was aware of this and was also watching her. And it's very interesting kind of switching of roles in a sense.
Yeah, he observes her for months, and without her realizing it. Now she's observing him too, but not in I guess not in the secretive way that he does her. At least that's, and we learned that too when he lets her know that he was always watching her and keep an eye on her. And if she walks out of a room, she doesn't see him looking at her at all, and then she leaves the room, and then suddenly he comes out. Where are you going? So he's always aware of her presence when they were together then. But this is and I think we see a complete role. Well, this is maybe for me the beginning of the role reversals in this, chapter that we'll see in their relationship as we go through it. And his description, she says, he looked desperate and brooding. That reminded me of some wrong and fettered wild beast or bird, dangerous to approach in his sullen woe, the caged eagle, whose gold-ringed eyes cruelty has extinguished, might looked that sightless Samson. I mean, he's now the caged bird.
Exactly.
Right?
Because exactly in that scene where he threatened violence, he was also saying, I want to get at the soul, and that's this kind of caged bird, and obviously I can't get to that without rending the cage, etc. And of course, you have that famous moment where she says, I am no bird, no net ensnares me, and then now he is exactly this caged eagle. I actually thought maybe that's a good name for your cocktail.
Ooh, the caged eagle.
Maybe that doesn't quite sum up the chapter though. Enough.
It's a good name though. It could it doesn't have to sum up the entire chapter.
Okay. Well, I'll throw that in the ring.
There you go. That's in the ring, definitely. But yeah, and also his whole appearance is very. I talk about Byronic Hero. Here's the Byronic Hero,
exactly.
Right? And also very, Satan-like as well. Paradise Lost, which we get a lot of, allusions to all through this book. The ultimate Byronic hero, the Byronic hero Byron wished he was, Satan in Paradise Lost.
Yes.
That this wronged and fettered and dangerous. That's who she sees, but she's not afraid of him, and she just wants us to let us know right off the bat. And now she's telling the reader, and reader, do you think I feared him in his blind ferocity? This is how she responds. A, she's fearless. No, I'm not afraid of him. And B, she's in love with him. A soft hope blent with my sorrow that soon I should dare to drop a kiss on that brow of rock and on those lips as sternly sealed beneath it. So he doesn't, this is her response, that she's fearless and still in love with him. And then Rochester gruffly sends his servant away. So John comes out and wants to help him. And let me alone. Spoken like a true Byronic hero. Let me alone. So I can wander around and be sullen. Jane knocks on the door, and as a ghost, she seems, when the servant answers, Mary answers, she started as if she had seen a ghost. And we've had this at different times in this novel. Jane is like a spirit, an apparition, a ghost. Other people are. After the fire, Rochester wanders the grounds as a ghost, we're told, before he goes away. And now Jane is a ghost. I mean, these kind of Gothic tropes that still continue throughout this novel, even at the very end here. What is that? It's just, this is the general, what does it say about Jane that she is a ghost at this moment?
Yes, that's a really interesting question. I suppose she's bringing back this memory, this kind of remnant of the past of Thornfield, of that time, which wasn't even that long ago. I mean, I don't think it's a year actually in between Thornfield, when she left Thornfield and then arrives to Ferndean.
It's been a year. It's been, I think, over a year now.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Not too long, but still,
I
think
now.
That
she's old. She's like 20. She's like 20 now.
She's like 20. Yeah. 19, 20, exactly. Yeah. I think she carries these memories and seems like this apparition of the past in this moment. And I guess, as we'll discuss as well, that kind of interaction between her and Rochester, she kind of has to, convince him that she is material, that she is real, that she's not a ghost. I mean, what do you think?
Well, for the Gothic, the ghost is always that kind of, even threatening from the past, something from the past that comes to threaten. We haven't hit that time yet in the 19th century where this is published, where with the spiritualist movement, where ghosts then represent, a connection, like like a message from the dead. Like that's not what's going on yet.
Yes.
So this seems to me to be more, the thinking of a ghost as a Gothic ghost or Shakespearean, the warning ghost.
Exactly. I was thinking of a warning in that sense. But then what would Jane be warning?
Yeah, I guess it's just that, she is, she's coming from or maybe the old Jane is dead. And this is now, a new Jane that can come now. But, or it's just or it's just, Bronte loves to throw this, these
peppers it everywhere. No, but I like that idea that the old Jane is dead. I think that's true in a sense. Yeah, somebody just also said about the Taylor Swift line, Jane can't come to the phone right now. Why? She's dead. That didn't make me think of that.
Who was that? Anastasia? Sure was. So there you go. Our resident Taylor Swift. So her and my daughter. So there you go. But Jane also immediately says to the servants to bring her trunk. I informed her I should stay. She's already, she doesn't need to see Rochester. She's going to stay. She knows that she's already made the choice that she's not come back to see how he is, to test the ground. I mean, she still has to, figure out what it'll be, but she has made the full choice to just be here. And then we'll have our reunion instead of the servant. Oh, and then Mary says Mary says that he always has candles brought in at dark, though he is blind, which is interesting. But we'll learn a little later that he can see a faint glow.
Exactly.
But he still doesn't need candles, and I guess it's him kind of still wanting to have some kind of normalcy, which is a good sign that he hasn't completely given up, all hope of life.
Yes, true.
Pilot recognizes her as she comes in. I think one edition I was looking at mentioned Ulysses returning home and the dog recognizing him. But that's I don't, maybe we can't find an earlier reference than Homer for that, but
maybe
that tends to be something that happens frequently, and especially in disguise situations where the dog knows. Pilot recognizes her, and Rochester thinks it's Mary bringing in the water. And then Jane begins to talk to him. And who is it? What is it? Who is this? Who is this? He says, or who is it? And then what is it? Who speaks? I like that. What is it? That Jane's not quite, I'm sure hearing her voice, he must think it's a spirit too, as we'll get to. But then all the language that he comes out here, great God, what delusion, what madness sees me. And then she gives these great Janian, replies. No delusion, no madness. You're helpless to sound. Is it only a voice? Oh, I cannot see, but I must feel, or my heart will stop and my brain burst. And then he gets, he holds her hand and prisoned it in both mine. He wants to hold her. He wants to, keep her for himself. Her very fingers. Is it Jane? What is it? This is her shape. This is her size. This is her voice. She says, she is all here, her heart too. God bless you, sir. I am glad to be so near you again. Jane Eyre was all he said. The reunion happens, and it's very emotional for the two of them. It's not as emotional for me as that last chapter. There's a couple chapters ago when she hears the voice. She goes out. That for me is like the climax of the novel for me reading it. And this is the reunion, which is more of a relief, like, finally, they're back together. And that's the way the book is constructed, regardless of how I feel about it.
Yes, exactly. It's going to happen inevitably.
That is, I have found you out. I am come back to you, she says. And he says, in truth, in the flesh, my living Jane. So still more allusions to her not being a real person, a ghost, a spirit. He'll start calling her a fairy again pretty soon, I think, as he always does. And then he gets his, I cannot be so blessed after all my misery. It is a dream, such dreams as I have had at night, when I have clasped her once more to my heart as I do now, and kissed her as thus, and felt that she loved me and trusted that she would not leave me. And then she says, which I never will, sir, from this day. So we get like at least 2 or 3 moments of this kind of final commitment throughout this chapter. And this is the first one. He says, I always woke and found it an empty mockery after dreaming of her. I was desolate and abandoned, my life dark, lonely, hopeless, my soul athirst and forbidden to drink, my heart famished and never to be fed. And this is biblical language from Rochester that Jane will absolutely recognize. We've had this throughout, and we have it especially from him, using this kind of very using this, I guess it's her too. I'm trying to remember earlier in some of the earlier chapters, they were going back and forth like this, and this very high, what strikes me as biblical language, scriptural kind of, my heart famished and never to be fed. You can imagine these as psalms.
She is nourishment to him. And I mean, we have this throughout this chapter, which I guess we'll come on to later, especially the kind of final few paragraphs. I think it's interesting. Obviously, previously we haven't thought about maybe Rochester as a very religious person, or particularly kind of,
and we finally get it in this chapter.
We do, exactly, which I think, again, perhaps, as we'll kind of come on to, explains, or at least kind of justifies the final ending of the novel with St. John, because I think, again, it's this kind of, we had, of course, Jane feeling this kind of idolatry towards Rochester, and Rochester was eclipsing God in her mind. And then, of course, Rochester himself was a quite kind of blasphemous, irreligious person.
Always, And now he fights in the church.
Exactly.
The clergy has to say, "You're in the house of God," like cut that out. Cursing and fighting, and but here, this is his. He's still desperately in love with her. He's still devoted to her, and she needs to know. That's what she needs to learn. That that is still the case. I think the reader needs to know it too. To help us, get back in and identify with this and be satisfied with their reunion. But I love her response, though, is like, have you come back to me? And she says, and you're not dead in a ditch and pining somewhere. And what does she say? She says,
"No, sir, I'm an independent woman now." Yeah,
and that's. Speak that you hinted at that earlier. I mean, this is important. I mean, and she means practically too. She has money.
Yes. I think this is another thing that I found really interesting with this chapter, that both of them have quite different definitions of independence. Of course, for women at this time, being independent was a question of finance, economics. Can you afford to keep yourself, particularly if you're kind of middle-class woman like Jane, who had to work previously to kind of earn her keep or just keep herself alive. Whereas with Rochester, as we'll kind of discuss, he has money, he has a lot of money, he has property, he's independent in that sense. He can travel, he can do whatever he wants. And yet actually in this chapter, we see him become and also just embrace being dependent. And I think that's such an interesting parallel and kind of shift in their dynamic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because what he had, or still has, he didn't necessarily, well, he did appreciate it, but it meant that he was unable to kind of be cared for, even be loved necessarily. Whereas now Jane also has it, and then is now open to marrying him in a kind of equal way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, she asserts this when they first get engaged, and,
Exactly.
he confirms it that yes, that we'll be equals, and
Yes.
but for a woman especially, it's extra. It's kind of extra good that she's able to return to this as like she doesn't need him financially, socially. She can survive on her own, and now she can really make that choice to be in this relationship. She's and then she says, my uncle's dead, left me £5,000. He actually left you 20,000, Jane. But you've given away 3/4 of it. And his response, this is practical, this is real. Very like Jane, her Janian replies, earlier, she's always, being, throwing out the facts there and the matter of factness of everything.
The materiality of it, yeah.
Yeah. And then she's rich, and she says, if you won't let me live with you, I can build a house of my own close up to your door. And you may come and sit in my parlor when you want company of an evening. That, again, she repeats it, I'm independent as well as rich. I'm my own mistress. So she offers, and I like this, that she's not going to assume that, she proposes a relationship between them in which she assumes she'll be his wife, but she doesn't say wife or beloved or anything like that. What does she say? I'll be your companion.
Yeah.
I'll read to you, walk with you. She even calls him master again. Cease to look so melancholy, my dear master. You shall not be left desolate so long as I live. And she says, perhaps I too rashly overleap conventionalities, and he, like St. John, saw impropriety in my considerateness, which is funny to think that Rochester would be like, well, because he wants her to be improper.
Yes, exactly.
But she's, she worries, and then she worries, she worries he might not want her in that way anymore.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how she's been quite forward. I think it's quite sweet how she suddenly, as she says, I felt a little embarrassed about being too rash and everything, too forward. But I understand his maybe reticence. I think they both maybe feel a sense of uncertainty in terms of where they stand. And of course, as we learn, as he says, he feels like, well, you have friends, you've been away, you want to get married to somebody, and etc. And then, of course, there's this kind of miscommunication between the two.
Yeah.
She wants to marry him. That's really it.
All righty. Let me take a quick mid break here to tell everybody that we bring Sundays with Jane Eyre to you for free. So if you'd like to support the Rosenbach through donation, you can do so at our website. And since this novel was published in 1847, we're asking for donations of $18.47 to support the show. I would like to thank those who have donated in the last 2 weeks. I didn't have my list of names last week. Mitchell G, Lucy S, Sam O, Jane D, Cyril W, all from Philadelphia, Gerard G from Westchester, PA, Lewis T from Wynwood, PA, and Karen F from that's Lewis and Karen. Thanks, Lewis and Karen. They're good friends of the Rosenbach. Joseph G from Audubon, New Jersey, Mary S from Strathmere, New Jersey, and Susan N from Alexandria, Virginia. You could also become a member of the Rosenbach, like Karen from Wynwood did. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, plus 10% off of any of our reading courses, 50% off of any Rosenbach programs. Lots of great programs and courses coming up this spring, April to June, including the Bronte course. The Brontes revisited, reappraised, and reimagined with Claire O'Callaghan on Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Sophie Franklin on Charlotte Bronte's Villette, and then Adele Hay on Anne Bronte's Tenant of Wildfeld Hall. That course will begin on April 24th. We're going to run them at Sunday afternoons, the same starting at 2:00 Eastern time in the US, the same time as the show runs. So you don't have to change your schedule around to do the Bronte course after doing Sundays with Jane Eyre. You're covering Villette.
I am, yeah.
Talk a little bit about Villette.
Yes. Well,
the masterpiece, as some people find.
Well, I was about to say, exactly. According to some, it's Bronte's masterpiece, which may sound controversial as we're talking about Jane Eyre.
Jane Eyre, yeah.
But it's such a strange, beautiful novel. It's quite long. It's also got this very intense, elusive narrator called Lucy Snow. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't read it yet before the course. Of course, by the time we do the course, those in attendance will have read it. But yeah, it's just, I personally think it is Bronte's best work, just in terms of its psychological intensity and depth. It's very complex, and as a reader reading it as well, you're kept at a distance throughout actually most, if not all, of the novel. It's often quite difficult to figure out, well, actually what's really happening here, what has happened, and so it really keeps you on your toes as a reader and leaves you in this very interesting kind of an ambivalent point at the end when you think, okay, where do I stand here? What do I think about this novel? What do I think about Lucy Snow? She's very cold, as her name suggests. And yeah, I just think it's such a fascinating book. So I'm really excited to speak to and work with everyone on it.
Can't wait. I can't wait to do that with you. That'll be a lot of fun. If you want to register for that course, go to the Rosenbach website, rosenbach.org, and click on the programs and courses, and you can find it there. It is going to be a lot of fun. It will fill up, so if you wait until it starts, there may not be room in it. And it is virtual, everyone, obviously, so you don't have to be in Philadelphia. We have several of our courses are running virtually, and then a few are running in person. So be sure to take a note of that when you go to register for Rosenbach course, because we have so many people now watch the show from outside of the Rosenbach's location. Next week is also our final episode of Sundays. I don't know how I'm going to get through the last episode, but I will. We'll welcome back our friends, the Ghoul Guides, Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going, for the last episode to talk about the very last chapter of the book, Reader, I Married Him. And next week, I will announce the next book that we'll cover in a weekly show from the Rosenbach. And as a hint, well, no, I'm not going to give any hints. I'm just going to announce it next week, that no hints. I'm just going to feel free to chat amongst yourselves as to what you think the next book will be. But we'll announce it next week, and I can't wait to do it. So, all righty. Let's return to this book.
Yes. So
we can finish this chapter. Jane's a little, worried that remember that I might have been all wrong, was perhaps playing the fool unwittingly in what she's proposing. But Rochester's not at all. My very soul demands you, it will be satisfied, or it will take deadly vengeance on its frame. That's the Rochester that, come on, man,
get a grip.
But Jane just, well, sir, I will stay with you. I have said so. She's, she's willing to make that promise. And then she says, I am content to be only your nurse if you think it better. Like she even offers him a dependent relationship, if that's what he wants. That she's will, and no, it's not that healthy in a sense, but it's I don't know if I wouldn't have said that to my wife too.
I think that's the thing. I think it's such an interesting part in a way, or this whole chapter, when they are discussing his dependency on her and her willingness
Yeah.
him to be dependent. But then again, him having a kind of upper hand in that dependence in a kind of interesting way, because exactly she's then kind of supplementing herself to him. She's saying, okay, no, I am at your bidding. And so he has the power in that way. But then as you say, so then that maybe brings in questions for feminism, etc. But then I think, as you say, well, when you love somebody, you want to care for them and you want to be there for them, and you want to maybe sacrifice things for their behalf. And I don't think that necessarily is that problematic. I mean, maybe in this dynamic, yes.
It can be. It is if it winds up being one way.
Yeah.
And as long as it's two ways, as long as I'm doing everything for, the partner of my relationship, and the partner's doing everything for me, then it winds up working, as long as it never becomes one way. And but this isn't a relationship, manual novel.
Yes, I wouldn't take this to bed and think, okay, how am I gonna have a partner in life?
It's so easy to go down that road when you're talking about novels that deal with romantic relationships. But her response here to him is, it's time someone undertook to rehumanize you, and she needs to comb his hair and just make him look a little more human again. And now he brings up his appearance, and this is interesting, because we've had this whole take through the whole novel between their appearance and how important that is in their lives. And I find it, and Jane is, I'm plain, I'm not attractive. Rochester's like, you're right, you're not. But then when he falls in love with her, she's beautiful, which is only, making the point that, like, she's not conventionally beautiful. The people would look at her and think, like, you're aesthetically beautiful. And it's clearly the same thing with him. Like, even when they fall in love, she's still like, yeah, you're still ugly, don't worry. That's the one thing I love about that Bronte's done with St. John, because St. John is really beautiful.
Just perfect.
He talks about it. He looks like this kind of, Grecian, beautiful ideal. But this is really a novel about two people who aren't the best looking people, who meet each other, and that's not important. And that's why it kills me in these adaptations, that not only, because it's hard not to cast beautiful people when you're trying to get, people to watch it, but so they ignore the fact that, like, you're really not ugly at all. You're, like, really good looking.
Yeah, like Michael Fassbender being Rochester, you think, okay.
He's like the least attractive. And he's still, very handsome man. But what I also find in adaptations is that, especially that 2006 with Ruth Wilson, that part of her coming to grips with her relationship with Rochester and falling in love with him is her discovering that she is beautiful in a way which is a very contemporary, a very modern way that we have to have these, romance tales, that you are beautiful. And Jane seems to make the point all the time that, like, I'm just plain, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
But that's tough to do with movies and TV. They got a lot of bucks to make on there. So.
Yeah, it's also not very nice, getting the casting call for an ugly woman, ugly man, and you get the role, but awkward. Yeah, but I think it is also playing with this idea, Jane and Rochester are, as you say, not conventionally attractive people, and yet obviously they're the focus of this novel, and we are encouraged to root for them as people and to want them to be together. And we're also encouraged to dislike very attractive people like Blanche Ingram, like St. John. It's kind of interesting, again, a kind of very literal representation of this kind of beauty is only skin deep, and actually don't judge a book by its cover on all these things. And I think that's, the Victorians were quite into, or this kind of, earlier Victorian period was quite into kind of appearances versus kind of internal, emotions and personality. And of course they had like physiognomy and phrenology.
I find Jane Eyre refreshing, because she doesn't fall for that. She doesn't, Bronte doesn't fall for that. She just says, no, she's this tiny little plain girl who, now woman. And she kind of almost takes pride in her plainness. So, no, that's not true. Except for the one scene with Blanche Chamber, when she realizes the cost of being plain Jane and drawing the pictures of both of them to compare. And which would Rochester, but of course, then it's which would Rochester want? He wants the plain one.
Exactly. And again, that's indicating that she thinks that he would want Blanche purely because of her beauty and her wealth. So again, material aspects, nothing to do with the kind of who you are as a person side. And I think, this is certainly advocating for that. That's one thing that Bronte is advocating for. Yeah.
The Rochester now plays up, because now he's talking about how he's, she asked him about his sight first of all, and he could see a ruddy haze, the candles are a luminous cloud, and then he calls her a fairy. Of course, he's got to start calling her fairy. So I think we've gone it's been she's been in the room for like 15 minutes. You haven't called her a fairy, so he needs to call her a fairy. And Jane just responds, and then Jane's like, "Well, when do you take supper?" I never take supper. I'm hungry. We're eating. She's always bringing him back to earth, and she does that, here.
Definitely.
He's again. This is a magical thing here, and she's like, "Yeah, how about we eat?"
Yeah. Let's get to the important stuff. Yeah.
Commonplace and practical, he calls it. He says, about her responses. She says, but then she has this other line here that after they're sitting together here, in his presence, I thoroughly lived and he lived in mine. Blind as he was, smiles played over his face, joy dawned on his forehead. I mean, this is, even though he's blind and doesn't have a hand, this is the reunion she wanted.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, in the previous chapter, what she was really worried about Rochester is whether he's gone, mad. He's kind of had a kind of mental health crisis. And I think when she realized that maybe that's not the case, and he still maybe is able to have, these kind of conversations with her, then I think it doesn't really matter that he has lost a hand and is blind. She doesn't really care. It's not a factor.
Yeah. He's still challenging her on this. You are altogether a human being, Jane. You were certain of that. I conscientiously believe so. And then he said, well, how could you just appear here? And she just says, because I came in Mary's place. I mean, she's always responding, like, duh, because I walked in the door and that's a common, and then she says, a commonplace practical reply out of the train of his own disturbed ideas was, I was sure, the best and most reassuring for him in this frame of mind, that if I keep things real with him, that it'll help him. But also that's always been her what she does. I'm sorry. Now is when she talked about his hair before looking at it. Now she's asking for his comb and am I hideous? Very, sir. You always were. And that playfulness between them is still nice to see too.
Yes. Very funny.
And now he starts to find well, where have you been? Were there only ladies? I laughed and made my escape, still laughing as I ran upstairs. She realizes that, I can make him jealous. And that will maybe help him out of this melancholy that he's going through. Spur him on, to tease him with jealousy will awaken him to be more of a, get him back, into the real world again. She goes to bed, and then the next day she doesn't come down right away. She hears him asking for him. She's going to wait up down. But I love this. I came down as soon as I thought there was a prospect of breakfast. So.
She has her priorities.
Yep.
I mean, it's interesting. I never thought that Jane was interested in food, and then obviously in this part she really is, which is great.
She is. And she went from being a starved child. Earlier in the novel to now you know, but it's a practical thing for her. She's not like, she's never going to be an epicure, right? She's never going to really be a gourmand and like, oh, this is, it's like food is sustenance.
Fuel, exactly.
It's time to eat.
Yeah, and I think especially in this situation, I mean, I assume they don't mention that he's lost a lot of weight, but the fact that he doesn't eat very much and forgets to, and he feels hunger is the only feeling he has in some evenings. You know, maybe this is another kind of motivation for her, and also maybe just the kind of having that practical act of feeding him or feeding herself rather than just kind of sitting in a room. It's doing something. It's kind of active.
Yeah, she comes down now and looks at him and sees him as that he looks mournful indeed. And then she says, to witness the subjugation of that vigorous spirit to a corporeal infirmity. His countenance reminded me of a lamp quenched waiting to be relit. So this is really, you know, she sees the change that he used to be in command and big and powerful. And now it's a kind of, you know, he lives in, you know, subjugation. And he sees her as the skylark. And more birds here. You are indeed here, my skylark. I heard one of your kind an hour ago singing high over the wood, but its song had no music for me, and more than the rising sun had raised, any more than the rising sun had made. All the melody on earth is concentrated in my Jane's tongue to my ear. She's a bird now that can sing to him, right? Can't be caged, skylark, out living in the wild. She's now the free one.
Yes. And then
he's the
exactly.
cage.
And then in the next paragraph, it says, the water stood in my eyes to hear this avowal of his dependence, just as if a royal eagle chained to a perch should be forced to entreat a sparrow to become its purveyor. So again, I mean, she's again now a sparrow here, and he's a royal eagle, but not only that, exactly chained to a perch.
You'd rather be, it's better to be the sparrow free than the chained eagle. And this is the reversal of positions. And that makes this a really, you know, kind of important end, I think, to this novel, and still works very well as even as a, you know, looking at as a kind of positive relationship, in that, you know, one of the issues in their relationship before was this, you know, master, you know, governess situation, and that's gone. I mean, that's not only is she, you know, she was a social equal before in a sense because of her parent. I mean, she was fine. She just didn't have any money. But now she has money, she has social position, and he is in a position where he cannot take care of himself. And the roles have reversed, maybe too far, but you know, she can at least have a freer, more independent way into this relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we can, I don't know if you want to talk about it now or maybe later on, but the fact that he seems to, you know, he has to become disabled in order for them to be in this position. And as we said, he's still chained. I find it really interesting. I mean, what do you think about the fact that in a way he seems to have to be brought low in order for them to be on this equal footing? It's something a bit unsettling, perhaps.
Part of it is the punishment, right? Part of it is the Christian penance that he has to go through within the worldview of Bronte in this novel, that he has to suffer, and he has to kind of, you know, that helps him prove his worth. That he has suffered, that he is, you know, and will continue to kind of pay a price for that in a sense. Even though he'll get his sight back. So, you know, spoiler, he can see it.
Yeah, sorry, spoiler.
That's the last chapter. He's not completely blind. He's not completely blind here either. He can kind of see.
No, but he regains more of his sight. Exactly. He can see.
I think it's part of her. I think it's part of Bronte, the author's way of redeeming him. You know, and in that's a very real Christian sense too. That Christ the Redeemer and goes through the passion and suffers and is, you know, crucified and goes through all of that physical abuse at the end. and that is the, and then is redeems us.
Yes.
But martyrs do this, and it's always it's a key component of Christian theology, that you need to suffer, and then you get your reward. And
yes,
for Rochester, the reward's Jane. That's a damn good reward. So maybe maybe it's another reason why there were people who had such problems with this novel, is that that it's not that it is a Jane is a very practical, I want to live this life kind of person, as Rochester is too.
Yeah, and I think maybe this does go back to the fact that she does not choose to be a martyr with St. John, and she does choose, I mean, again, we can discuss this. There is spirituality in their reunion, in their union, as this chapter and the next one, indicates. But at the same time, she does choose the material world with him, not the next life, not the spiritual realm with St. John. And I mean, this chapter did make me think about all the reviews, the initial reviews of Jane Eyre, and how this book was called blasphemous, irreligious, unchristian. And you read this chapter and think, well, there is quite a lot of religion here and penance, but not enough, perhaps, because I think she does not choose truly Christian route.
It's like penance, so I can have this great earthly corporeal relationship.
Yeah. And as you say, he regains his sight. So, I mean, I don't know, is that, if being blind is indeed a punishment in this novel, he regains it. And so then what is the message there? It's,
Well, this is fascinating too, because, as then their next step here is they go outside, out into the open air, they go out into the woods and sit, and he puts her on his knee, very intimate. And she says, why, did I refuse to let him when seated, place me on his knee? Why should I, when both he and I were happier near than apart? So you get the kind of, they're not married, okay, everybody, and she's sitting on his lap. That is a complete improper thing to do. And but she's fine with that. Jane recognizes that, come on, we both love each other, and it's totally fine that I can be on his lap now. We're going to be married. She's okay with this. And this is when they have their final conversation. To reunite here. He says, what could or is this her? I'm sorry. He says, what could my darling do? I asked, left destitute and penniless. What did she do? Let me hear now. He wants to hear her story. So what happened to you? And I love how he starts this out, because he starts it out as he says, cruel, cruel deserter. Oh, Jane, what did I feel when I discovered you had fled from Thornfield? And as soon as I read that, I'm thinking, that's not about you, dude.
Exactly. I think.
But then he turns it around. And then he does say, I could imagine, I had left you things, you didn't take them. It's all, you were destitute and penniless, and that's what really hurt me. So he does turn it around, and I thought, well, that's nice. That shows to me he has moved into a position, because he wasn't. When he was wandering around, when he was like Mr. Blind, I'm sullen and morose, and that was all him thinking about himself. But she shows up, and he says that he was, what happened to her, that he was more concerned with her. I think that's good. I think that shows for me, a growth in him, and it goes against what he's saying. I have to have you. I demand you. That's countered with I was really concerned with you when you were gone away. She says, and then we get his apology, right? His apology for menacing her right before she left. He says he never would have forced me to be his mistress. Violent as he seemed in his despair, he in truth loved me far too well and too tenderly to constitute himself my tyrant. He would have given me half his fortune with demanding so much as a kiss in return. So like, he kind of says, I was threatening you, but I didn't mean it. Well, that's.
I think it's all very well him saying it now in hindsight and retrospect.
Yeah.
But I mean, she also didn't know that. He was very convincing in his violence and
Yes.
in anger and despair. And so I think, what was she supposed to do in that position? I think it's more, again, perhaps Bronte trying to kind of give him or allow him to kind of air his perspective, which I mean, he does quite a lot throughout this novel, I have to say, which makes sense because, they do get married and she is Mrs. Rochester while writing.
They do? Yes, they do.
Oh yeah, spoiler.
Yeah, Reader, I Married Him. That's the name of our episode next week. And now she gets to tease him about St. John. St. John is your cousin, and they go through this long thing, and it's really, and it's kind of cute. I kind of like this at the end of the book. He's like, oh, he's a person of low stature, and his brain, he's rather soft, and he's pretty supersonic, and she keeps, countering that, like, no, he's actually, educated, he's really good looking, he dresses well, and then aside, damn him. To me, did you like him, Jane? So yeah, you're still. This is the Rochester that I actually like. This is the real, earthy Rochester that I kind of have more respect for in a sense. And she says it gave him. Jane says the jealousy had gave him respite from the gnawing fang of melancholy. I would not therefore immediately charm the snake. And then he describes himself as being like a Vulcan. And then somebody had asked a question about Vulcan in the here. You are certainly rather like Vulcan, sir. Roberta had asked about the word Vulcan. She only knows Vulcan from Star Trek.
I love that.
No, it's a classical reference, and Vulcan is the god of the underworld who is also lame and has a limp, and he is ugly and within under the earth, and Zeus's brother, who's kind of but they divide up the earth. It's like Zeus gets the heavens, Poseidon the seas, and Vulcan the earth, but he's under the earth, and he's not particularly attractive, and that's how Rochester sees himself. And Jane's like, yeah, you are. You're like the ugly god.
Connected to fire as well.
Yes,
I'm just remembering. Vulcan. Yeah.
So they they keep, he's on about this, and just, they have this great just interchange, this very quick back and forth interchange. Did he study much? A good deal? What? Hindustani? What did you do? I learned German, and then back and forth. And then did he ask you to learn? And then finally at the end of it, he wanted you to marry him. And she says, he asked me to marry him. And now it's like, oh,
that is a fiction, an impudent.
You can get off my knee. He doesn't push her off his knee. He's like, you can get off my knee now. And then she's like, no, I'm comfortable there. I love that. And I just assume she's going to do that little like wiggle, like, oh, I'm comfortable here. And then we get the great, this is, and then, what will happen? She says, read that he is not my husband paragraph that she says. This is her.
He is not my husband, nor ever will be. He does not love me. I do not love him. He loves as he can love, and that is not as you love, a beautiful young lady called Rosamond. He wanted to marry me only because he thought I should make a suitable missionary's wife, which she would not have done. He is good and great, but severe, and for me, cold as an iceberg. He is not like you, sir. I am not happy at his side, nor near him, nor with him. He has no indulgence for me, no fondness. He sees nothing attractive in me, not even youth, only a few useful mental points. Then I must leave you, sir, to go to him. Yeah.
And then, this is her whole reasoning for not, saying yes to St. John. He doesn't love her. And she's not looking for just the social. She's not looking for just I just need a husband or to go off and be a missionary and do something important. What she wants is, to be happy with someone and to be by their side. She wants domestic happiness, which then in a sense makes this the ultimate Victorian novel, right? Like,
I mean, it's so, yeah, I think we talk a lot about, how rebellious and radical this novel is. And it is certainly in many ways, but it is very conventional too, isn't it? I mean, I suppose their relationship is not necessarily that conventional in some senses, but yeah, in this ending.
It's like very unconventional to get to the place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. She sits on his knee, but then also ultimately is kind of his helpmate and ends in domestic bliss. Yeah.
And she says, "All my heart is yours, sir. It belongs to you, and with you it would remain. Were fate to exile the rest of me from your presence forever." Again, as he kissed me, painful thoughts darkened his aspect, and he's kind of, starts to like, my vision, my crippled strength. And then he thinks, he harkens back to that tree. I am no better than the old lightning struck chestnut tree in Thornfield orchard. And people don't remember, as soon as they say, they declare their love for each other, I love you, we'll get married. Boom, the lightning, bang, strikes the tree. Should have, recognized that was, a sign. But now in him remembering it, she says, "You are no ruin, sir, no lightning struck tree. You are green and vigorous." I mean, she's trying to bring him out of his, melancholy. And then we have this kind of like, marriage ceremony here in a sense. "Ah, Jane, I want a wife. Do you, sir?" "Yes, it is news. That depends on the circumstances of your choice. Choose then, sir, her who loves you best. I will at least choose her I love best. Jane, will you marry me?" "Yes, sir." "A poor blind man." "Yes, sir." "A crippled man." "Yes, sir." "Truly, Jane, most truly." We get this, mimicking of the exchange of vows.
Yes.
Which also we had in their there's a kind when in their final moment when they separated, there was like it was like anti-marriage vows where he's like, "And you will leave me." "I do." And then but are you really going to leave me?" "I do." And she was saying "I do" to him before in that chapter before she left, as a kind of assertion that we're not getting married. And now we have again this, I will through here, that this is the wedding. They got to go in front of the clergyman, but this is the wedding scene. And it's interesting, his response here, "Truly, Jane, most truly, sir. Oh, my darling, God bless you and reward you." That's Rochester. So
yes,
there's a change, and then we'll start to see that here, right? And here's where we talk about sacrifice. He tells her, "Because you delight in sacrifice, that's the only reason why you'd marry me." And what does she say?
Sacrifice? What do I sacrifice? Famine for food, expectation for content, to be privileged to put my arms around what I value, to press my lips to what I love, to repose in what I trust. Is that to make a sacrifice? If so, then certainly I delight in sacrifice.
And then he says, "And to hear with my own infirmities, Jane, to overlook my deficiencies." And then she says, "Which are none, sir, to me. I love you better now, when I can really be useful to you, than I did in your state of proud independence, when you disdained every part but that of the giver and protector." And then he says, I think this is so interesting, "Hitherto I've hated to be helped, to be led. Henceforth, I feel I shall hate it no more. I did not like to put my hand into a hireling's, but it is pleasant to feel it circled by Jane's little fingers. I preferred utter loneliness to the constant attendance of servants, but Jane's soft ministry will be a perpetual joy. Jane suits me. Do I suit her?
then she says, to the finest fibre of my nature, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think
that we.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, his admission here that he will no longer hate to be helped, to be led.
Yeah.
That's such intense vulnerability for him as well, I think. And again, I was thinking about this in relation to, we talked about their dynamic and the power imbalance or rebalance here. In a sense, this is quite a kind of powerful moment for Rochester as well. But there's this famous reading of Rochester's loss of a hand and also loss of his sight. Richard Chase refers to it as a kind of castration. So he's kind of like emasculated by it. He becomes kind of this feminine figure. But then I feel like actually here, this to me is this kind of emphasis on care, on the fact that they will care for each other. And he's accepting that. He's accepting that kind of true love in a way, which I think is so powerful.
I do. And really, it reduces the gap in their social situation that used to exist. And now that's not there anymore. And it really empowers her, and they both, recognize this. And this isn't a sacrifice to her. This is a kind of leveling of, the differences between us, in a sense that I get to actually help you instead of you being able to help me because you're of your social position.
Yeah.
He's like, we're getting married right away, 3 days. I'm surprised he's not like, let's go now, right? Going the way 3 days. And then I'd never mind fine clothes and jewels now. All that is not worth a fillip. That was important to him before, and it's not important now. He wanted her to have the fine clothes, beautiful dresses, and all his jewels. He doesn't need that now. And now we get the penitent Rochester, right? And now he talks about this, and and I almost feel like here's the author, the clergyman's daughter, having to I need to make sure that this novel fulfills the role that I'm in life with a father who's a clergyman. Exactly. And my hero, as even Satan-like as he has been before in this, is going to be a proper, pious Christian in our relationship. And he talks about it. He says, Jane, you think me, I dare say, an irreligious dog. He is. You are, Roger.
Exactly.
Damn me a couple paragraphs earlier.
Yes.
But my heart swells with gratitude to the beneficent God of this earth just now. He says, I would have sullied my innocent flower. This is true. In marrying her before, illegally marrying, not really marrying her before, breathed guilt on its purity. The omnipotent snatched it from me. I am my stiff-necked rebellion. Now I'm thinking like he's comparing himself like Satan in Paradise Lost. Almost cursed the dispensation instead of bending to the decree. I defied it. And then he's kind of humbled by God in this sense. And come back to God. And he says, and now he recounts the situation that ties them together.
Yes.
Last chapter, 2 chapters ago, we heard Jane hearing his voice, and he tells the story. He was sitting in his room at night, longing for her and calling out to her, Jane, Jane, Jane. And she said, did you speak the words aloud? I did, Jane. And then he hears, and it's the same time. Was it last Monday night, somewhere near midnight? He doesn't even question this. He'll say, what do you mean? Did you, but she asked when it was. And then he hears an answer. I am coming. Wait for me. Where are you? He says, where are you? Seems spoken amongst mountains. For I heard a hill sent echo repeat the words. And then Jane said that exactly. She says, where are you? And she hears the echo back from the hills. So this is what he heard as well. I could have deemed that in some wild, lone scene, I and Jane were meeting. In spirit, I believe we must have met. I love this because it is the acknowledgement that it's true, that what went on, that they're really, connected in that way, and they could hear each other over distance like that. But as much as, because I'm an irreligious dog, And so as much as Rochester's trying to tie it to God here, it really exists in the natural world. And I kind of like that about this, that it has that other reading I could give it as well. And then she says, even she confirms it with us. Reader, it was on a Monday night near midnight that I had to receive the mysterious summons. Those were the words. So we know this as a reader. She's confirming it for us. But she doesn't want to tell him.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. She didn't want to kind of, he's too prone to gloom, and that mind needed not the deeper shade of the supernatural.
Very interesting, that like almost as if I'm recognizing you're being some pious Christian about this. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Maybe that will help.
Don't want to bring this to earth too much again. Yeah.
Let's have you say it was God, and then you'll be really good.
Yes. That's I like that interpretation.
But somebody in the I keep mentioning him as kind of linked with Satan in Paradise Lost, and
right.
Linda comments too that Milton was blind too. So,
yes.
Which didn't catch me during this. I think this piety makes him more appealing, to Jane, and I think in the book's audience originally at the time.
Yeah.
And also, it further justifies me not being on Team St. John, but like. Yeah, I'll go along with you, Rochester, with the way you're saying this, and it is a contrast to St. John's piety. St. John's piety would have, it never would have taken him this way. St. John's piety sees, God tells him to go off on a mission, and I'll go and die, and that's great. And Rochester's tells him to reunite with the love of his life.
Yes. No, and I think in a way, I'm a religious dog, I guess. I don't identify as religious, but in my sense of Christianity, it is about love and bonds between other people and community and caring for one another. And this is exactly what their relationship in this moment is. They've affirmed that. Whereas with St. John, there is no care. There's very little kind of sense of community, no love. It's just kind of, dead, cold as an iceberg, as Jane says. And so I think exactly this is much more appealing as a kind of worldview for me as well. Yeah.
Well, she finally gets off his lap. The whole time she's on his lap. It's a very intimate exchange that they have. And he kind of says a prayer. He takes his hat up, he bends his eyes, sightless eyes to the earth in mute devotion. Only his last words of the worship were audible, that he's asking for strength, to be a better person. Yes, that's what I want you to be, Rochester. You need to be a better person and then he stretched out his hand. He stretched his hand out to be led. He's fully humbled here, and in a way that is good for him. And Jane, she says, I took that dear hand, and then the chapter ends. I served both for his prop and guide, and then this gorgeous final line. Right, this should be the end. This should be the last line of the novel. We entered the wood and wended homeward.
I have chills from that. Yeah, it's beautiful.
What a line. We entered the wood and wended homeward. It's almost Diane. I mean, it's like, but it's a beautiful line, and it's very alliterative, and that is, it's like the fairy story like ending, really, to their romance in a sense. But in a very, I think, kind of positive way, and that what they've been through and how this has kind of brought them to this position where they're far more equal in a time where, I mean, let's face it, she's the governess. She's never going to be his equal. And yet here's a novel that kind of says, no, let's examine that and create circumstances where she is his equal. even though he has to be blind and crippled and almost force her into a false marriage and all that to get to this point. They are so this. That's really the end of their story right there. We entered the wood and wended homeward.
Yeah, and they're in the secluded, coming back to, I guess, the Ferndean place, this kind of final location. I think you can read it in a positive way, because I think in some senses they, as a couple, do want to be removed from society, not in a negative way, but, as we've seen throughout the novel, or at least what Jane's represented, society, like Mr. Brocklehurst, Mrs. Reed, the Ingrams, all of these people, they are hypocrites, they are cruel. And so why wouldn't you want to remove yourself from those people and their watchful eyes and their gossip? And so in that sense, I think Ferndean perhaps is a fitting location. There was also this kind of massive fern craze. I don't know if you heard about the pterodomania in the Victorian period. They were just obsessed with ferns.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Loved ferns.
I do know. Yes. Yeah.
So then that name Ferndean maybe indicates that we're meant to think more fondly on this location than maybe we are kind of led to believe. But then, of course, yes, it's also desolate and damp, and you think, okay, you're going homeward.
This place sounds cool to me. I think I want to live there. I want to live there more than Thornfield.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's it.
Secluded place, out in the woods. I kind of like that a lot. Well,
live their lives together.
We had a couple questions unrelated to this chat. Pauline asked that didn't George Eliot prefer Villette to Jane Eyre? Is that true?
Yeah, she did. She wrote in a letter that, she referred to it as an even more wonderful book than Jane Eyre, and then referred to it as kind of this preternatural aspect to the novel. So yes, George Eliot was a fan, which makes sense. I think when you read Villette, you can see, and then if you've read George Eliot's work as well, not that there are kind of similarities, but yeah, I think that you can understand why Villette resonates with somebody like George Eliot. It's quite philosophical, and there is realism there, but it's also kind of there's this meditative aspect to Villette that I think
Jane Eyre doesn't strike me as a novel that George Eliot would have loved. So
she did like Jane Eyre. She was a fan of it, but yeah, she also, I think, referred to it as kind of, there are some scenes in it that wouldn't be out of place in the newspapers reporting very sensational crimes. So yeah, I mean, which is true. There is a lot of melodrama in Jane Eyre, as we all know. Yeah.
Anastasia's asking about my what's my favorite Dickens novel. I think she's only asking that because she thinks that might give a hint to what the next book will be, and I won't even answer that. So that will have no bearing upon. I don't want to, hint. No. I will tell you my I have two favorite Dickens novels. One is Pickwick Papers. And which is the first novel, and I love, and it's the world I want to be in. And the other was, and it's Bleak House. So
Yes, I think Bleak House is my favorite.
And they're so not the same book. So it's Pickwick and Bleak House are my two favorite Dickens novels. So there you go, Anastasia. I told you that anyway. All righty, Brontosaurs and Airheads. Thank you all for tuning in today. We'll post this recording on our website if that's how you're watching. Thanks for watching that way. We also have a Sundays with Jane Eyre Facebook group where you continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook. Join in that conversation. And I will post the name of the cocktail today on the Facebook group. I got lots of entries in the chat here that I will choose from, including Caged Eagle from Sophie Franklin. I like that one. That's a good one. But you can also go to the Rosenbach's YouTube account and like the Jane Eyre videos because we're streaming live there as well. Subscribe to the channel, leave comments there too. Thank you, Brianna, who was our chat Mrs. Fairfax today. Only one more show, Brianna, next week for you to be the chat Mrs. Fairfax. Next week will be our final episode of Sundays with Jane Eyre, episode 28. Our good friends, the Ghoul Guides, Lauren and Mary, Dr. Lauren Nixon and Mary Going will join us to talk about the final chapter of the novel Reader, I Married Him. And really, it's a wrap up. It's a and this is what happened to Adele, and this is what happened to us, Jane and Rochester, and this is what happened to, St. John and the River Sisters. But we'll also talk about the novel as a whole. We'll talk about our experience over the entire run of this, deep dive into this, magnificent novel. And of course, I will announce the next book in our Biblio-Venture series. Just one episode left, everyone. If you're looking for more virtual engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including the course, The Brontes with Sophie Franklin and Claire O'Callaghan and Adele Hay. And please support the Rosenbach, which you can do by donation or become a member. I invite you to join. Sophie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to have you here for two of the episodes. This is really great.
It was great fun. Thank you so much. And for the penultimate chapter. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. And it's really the last. It's like the wrap up of the book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the wrap up. This is the end of
the meat of the final. Yes. Yeah.
Rochester and Jane reunited. And good. All righty. Everyone, playing us out over the credits will be Pleated Gazelle's song Secrets. Farewell, readers. May you live entirely for and with what you love best on earth.
Oh.
Bye-bye, Sophie. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.